No, the solution is actually much more harsh. God says we ourselves are to become living stone. A monument to not a pretend, not a made-up, but a true and living God. And if we are that, then we are the people that is said in Exodus chapter 23 that will have blessings on our food and water. We'll have plenty supplies and resources to go around. The sickness will be taken away. We'll be healing the masses. There will be no miscarriage. There will be no barrenness of the land. There will always be a harvest and a fruitfulness, and He will give us a long and full lifespan. Not only, a long life is a curse, unless it's also a full life. A long life of loneliness is a curse, unless it's also a full life. So not only does He promise a long lifespan to Main Street, generations and generations, but a full one. When we break up the sacred stones and we embrace the living stone. Still keeping your place in John chapter 5, I'm going to jump to John chapter 3. In those days, John the Baptist came, preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. This is He who was spoken of through the prophet Isaiah, a voice of one calling in the wilderness. Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for Him." Where did John do his work? In the wilderness. Now, during that time, in the time of Jesus, if you weren't Jew, you were unclean by their definition. So if you were in a territory or a land that was not occupied by them, it was wilderness, it was barbarity, it was uncouthness, it was not civilization. Even Rome, the greatest population center at the time, was considered wilderness by the Jews because it was not under the control of Israel. But John didn't come out of Israel. John came out of the wilderness. John grew up in the wilderness. John did his preaching and most of his teaching from the wilderness. Not inside the boundaries and walls of Israel, for Israel was non-existent roughly at the time, but out where the need was. And even Jesus says, when speaking of John, what did you go out into the wilderness to see? Well, that was John's place, not among the Jews. Well, among the Jews, but preparing to bring the word to the Gentiles as well. Among the Jews in the wilderness. The Jews that had need, the Jews that were willing to listen. Now, where did Jesus spend His ministry? In the wilderness. He didn't go to the populated places. He went down to the ghettos. He went down to the barrios. He went down to the places of poverty and crime. Go into the wilderness. And bring people back to Him. Now, a living stone, unlike a dead stone doesn't move. It just kind of sits there. The wind may blow it around, the water may wash it around. We may kick it over, pick it up and move it, but it's not going anywhere on its own. So what's the key difference between a dead stone and a living stone? A living stone can move. A living stone will go. It will not stay in place. So finally, we get to where you are on John chapter 5. John chapter 5. You see, God wants a monument to Himself in our church. Not an idol. He doesn't want a church to be without power. He doesn't want a church to be stagnant and without motion and direction. He wants it to display all of these blessings that He's promised. John chapter 5 and verse 16. So how do we do that, church? How do we do that? How do we display ourselves as a living organism organism, a living thing, together known as Main Street Baptist Church. John chapter 5, verse 16, so because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work. To this very day, I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. In verse 19, Jesus gave them this answer. Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. You see, not even God would take his own Son, kick him out of heaven. So tell me how it is down there when you get back. God went ahead of his own Son. God prepared the way for his own Son. And it was true from the beginning of time up through John the Baptist. And Jesus says, God goes before me. God wasn't standing beside Jesus saying, pointing him. That's always the perception we get when we start talking about doing and knowing God's will. Well, which way is God pointing me? And maybe if we had some little antennas we could detect a little easier. That's not how God works. God goes ahead. God goes forward and says, now you come to me. It's like teaching the little ones to walk for the first time. I don't think Maddie Grace would ever walk. She just saw no good reason for it. It just didn't bring anything positive to her life to have to be able to walk. She was getting everything she needed. So what do? We stand them up on the edge of the couch or on a chair or on the table and say, come to me, come to me. And we get such joy over that first struggling little step. And then there's 2 steps. There's 3 steps. You are no different to God. Come here. Come here, Kelly. Come to me. Stagger over, and I take 1 step and 2 steps. Until finally I can walk. Where? To wherever God already is. That's what Jesus said. He said, I just go through my life being obedient to God, and when I see God at work, when I see God saying, here I am, come to me, I go there. That's pretty simple, I think, as far as being able to know what God's will and direction is. So Main Street, how are we going to know in the days to come what God's will and direction is for us? Because we're going to become living stones. And we're going to walk through life not with blinders on and not with one eye closed or both eyes closed. We're going to walk through life looking for God and what he's already doing around us and in our community. For when we see that, that is our invitation to go to. He's already doing the work. We go enjoy him. That's the easy way. That's the way he's provided for. There are other ways to go about it, but they're very expensive, they're very costly, and we usually run out of enthusiasm before we ever get around to the goal. So in the coming days, well actually not the coming days, next week, I'm going to lay a new challenge out for the church. It's going to start March the 1st. How do we know where God is? Well, first you got to know what his word is. You got to know what he said. For when you're going through your life, minding your own business, and pieces and parts of God's word and instruction start coming back to you from other sources, That's God's invitation. He said, here I am, send me. Or here I am, come to me. And then we're tempted to ignore it and go on about our business and, no, that's just a coincidence. That's just an accident. There are no accidents and coincidences in God's kingdom. It's all for a purpose and a reason. And we're going to grow into living stone, the kind of believers that are sensitive to that are open to that. And when God reveals Himself, we go to where He is. Even if it means jumping into the fire or diving into the lion's den. But rarely these days is it anything quite that dramatic. We've got to know what His Word is. We've got to be able to recognize it when it comes back to us. But the second thing you got to have, you got to know Him. You got to know Him. If my Aunt Janet, she's not, but if she was in a crowd of people and I said, go find my Aunt Janet, well, you don't know what she looks like. You don't know her. You may have been talking to her already. So we got to know what God looks like. We got to know where He is in the general location. God didn't hide in the wilderness and say, hey, y'all come find me. He led the way. He was a voice calling out. He sent prophets. He sent teachers. This is the path. Will you walk it? Living stones will. A dead stone cannot. A dead stone can just lay there. So here's where we're headed with that. I have found a very structured, very nicely structured program to read through the New Testament. Not going book by book. It breaks it up so you go from the Gospels over to the letters, and it's kind of interchanged to help bring meaning to that. And starting March the 1st, I'm going to challenge you to come together as a church and let's read through the New Testament. Let's see everything that's in there. I know I've done it, but it's been a long time. And I calculated, I have written almost 2,000 original sermons. And I had near about covered the whole New Testament. So if all you've ever relied on is the preacher's preaching, you haven't covered it either. You don't know what's in there. Let's see what's in there so we recognize it when it comes back to us. Second, let's commit to daily prayer so that we recognize God when He shows up. That we don't look Him in the face and not realize who He is or not recognize Him. And wait, it gets ugly now. Let's come back and share our stories. Let's come back and share what we saw. Share what we learned. I'm going to start on Wednesday nights. On our Bible reading plan, it's only a 5-day plan. I give you Sundays off. Sunday's a day of reflection over what you've read. It's a day of reflection over church. There's no assigned reading for Sundays. It's only one chapter a day, so it's about 5 minutes worth of reading. That's not a whole lot. And then I give you Wednesdays off. So that on Wednesday nights, we can come together and compare notes over this past week. What has God said to me? What is God saying to Main Street Baptist Church? And I know there are some that cannot be here on Wednesday nights. If we need to have more than one meeting to have our Bible study discussion, I'm more than happy to do that. You let me know. Here's the point. Only when you know what God has called you to do can we as a church know what we are empowered to do. To know what our direction and our mission is. When we all know what we're called to do and we compile that data together, then we know, hey, we're this kind of church. Hey, we're that kind of church. This is what we need to do. And not do a bunch of things good, do a few things great. And as you've paid attention through life about where God is, and we compile that data of I saw God here, I saw God doing this work, I saw God doing that work, then we know where our population is. We know who God is sending us primarily to. And when we know that, when we know our mission, and we know our population, then we become a New Testament church. One of those of great joys. Whereas we read there in Exodus, plenty of food and water to go around, plenty of health and healing, and a long, happy, full life. But it takes you. It takes you. If even one holds back, it handicaps the rest of us. We're brought together for a purpose and a reason.